All right. I'm here with Mr. John Weeks. How are you doing, my brother?
I'm doing excellent. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. We were just bullshitting a little bit ahead of time. You know, I think about like when I thought about doing this book, I was thinking about like the way that the protests were going and the NGOs like paying these protesters, at least paying the organizers that put the protests together. And how these tactics are used and how so many of these people are useful idiots getting trained in these tactics and they don't even know what they're doing. So I
100%.
so I thought it would be important to go through the book. And as I told you, you were the first person that came to mind as who I would want to read with and do commentary with because you usually have pretty original takes from everybody else. So I enjoy whenever I have you on because you make me think about things in a different way.
I was honored for the invite and I'm excited to get into this classic work.
Yeah. So as everybody can see on the screen, hopefully everybody can see it. I don't need audio today, so I can't fuck up the audio. We got rules for radicals and pragmatic. I hear some people say primer. I'm going to say primer because I'm used to the word primer, and it makes more
I
sense to
concur with
me.
Primer.
It just makes sense to me. So we're just going to scroll on down. We got personal acknowledgments, which aren't the ones that usually get quoted. The one that always everybody always quotes is right here where he says, "Lest we forget, at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical from all our legends, mythology, and history. And who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which? The first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer." So that's the quote or the acknowledgement that so many people want to point out whenever it comes to this book that Saul Alinsky pays tribute to Lucifer in this book. And what he fails to tell you is that the kingdom of the world was granted to the prince of this world, but the story has a different ending than one might choose to believe.
That
So, all right.
was
So
kind
I
of
want
jarring for me, can I just say?
really,
So I had never read the book. I've heard about it. I think I first heard about it during the Obama years, like you were saying before when we were talking. I think it was Sean Hannity.
mm,
And he would kind of portray Saul Alinsky as like communist villain. And then Scott Horton, director of Libertarian Institute, he often mentions part of this book where Alinsky says that the action is in the reaction. And Scott will apply that to all sorts of geopolitical events, in particular terrorism. The
mm,
terrorist is trying to provoke the reaction because that's where the action is. That's how I came into the book, just with those ideas. And I'm trying to not be biased, but I recognize that I have my biases. And if I'd read this maybe like 5 years ago, I might not have even thought that much about the shout out to Lucifer. But like given the current climate and current issues that are going on, that was really jarring. Like, what? He dedicated the book to Satan?
yeah, yeah.
What?
It's right under a Thomas Paine quote too. So
And I don't know if it's accurate. Now that I've been reading the book, I don't know if it's accurate to call Saul Alinsky a communist. I'd love your thoughts on that. But I have noticed that like communists that I know love Thomas Paine. They love to quote that guy.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it well, and it's funny because so you have this kind of like predicament that you're in whenever you start talking about like founders of the United States because you had the Viet Cong that loved to quote Thomas Jefferson, yet they were a valid communist. And so you had the United States basically going to war in Vietnam against a bunch of Jeffersonians turned communists. so, so, um, but yeah, I mean, you can see you bring up that quote, the action is in the reaction, and you can see that in what happened in Minneapolis, right? The way that ICE overreacted to the protests because they're not trained in handling protests. So their inexperience and lack of training in, managing protests and crowds of that nature led to, the deaths of two people. And so they utilize that action is in the reaction constantly. That's a constant tactic that that is set forth, you know. But we'll get started in the prologue and we'll answer what I think about the communist speak here in the first three paragraphs. We'll get into that. So we're going to start in the prologue. It's about 14, 15 pages. And I think that's probably what we'll do for the day. And then we'll pick up chapter one next week because it's around 21 or 22 pages. So
Excellent.
instead of doing, I was thinking about doing the prologue and the first chapter today, but I was like, man, that'll probably go like 2.5, 3 hours if we try to do that. So I was like, nah, let's try to keep it right close to an hour. So,
Beautiful.
prologue. The revolutionary force today has two targets, moral as well as material. Its young protagonists are one moment reminiscent of the idealistic early Christians, the Puritans, yet they also urge violence and cry, burn the system down. They have no illusions about the system, but plenty of illusions about the way to change our world. It is to this point that I have written this book. These are words, these words are written in desperation, partly because it is what they do and will do that will give meaning to what I and the radicals of my generation have done with our lives. They are now the vanguard, and they have to start almost from scratch. Few of us survived the McCarthy Holocaust of the early 1950s, and of those, there were even fewer whose understanding and insights had developed beyond the dialectical materialism of orthodox Marxism. My fellow radicals, who were supposed to pass on the torch of experience and insights to a new generation, just were not there. As the young looked at the society around them, it was all, in their words, materialistic, decadent, bourgeois in its values, bankrupt, and violent. Is it any wonder that they rejected us in toto? So he is admitting to being a Marxist of sorts. But what people don't understand is Marxism has made transitions over time. And this is why you get these people that will say like postmodernism is not Marxism, but Marxism over the years adapted a lot of the postmodern ideals into its system because, as he says, the orthodox Marxism had been found out, it had been destroyed, it had been defeated, and McCarthy was correct and he did nothing wrong and had gone a long way to destroy the Marxist tendencies in the United States and in the systems that exist in the United States. So he's kind of like looking at that kind of like reminiscently like, yeah, we did that, but because Marxism is so objectionable to people, we had to make adjustments and the young people today are utilizing the new tactics that we had to come up with in order to spread the message of the maybe not so much communist but socialistic, and I would even go as far as saying Fabianistic tendencies.
I thought it was pretty jarring when he refers to the Joe McCarthy Holocaust.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa. And I thought, to your point about sort of postmodernism as rebranded Marxism or as a uh, as a vehicle through which Marxism is peddled to the youth. I thought about that too when he's like, yeah, there's orthodox Marxism. Oh, so
Mm.
you mean like people realized that this idea of the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie was super simplistic and stupid and also leads to mass starvation. So now you're going to rebrand it as, oh, we've got, these different oppressed and oppressor groups. We've got all this sort of cultural stuff that we have to look at. And it does seem like a lot of these Marxist thinkers, they just like academics will do, they keep making it more complicated. They keep making it uh, more niche. but behind it is the same basic agenda.
Mhm. Well,
So when
in
I
oh, go ahead.
so when I read that, I was just like, okay, yeah, that's what I thought. This guy's a communist. But then when I read more, I was like, oh, well, maybe something different.
Yeah, because what these guys have done is they've attached themselves to kind of the most radical traditions of every kind of ideology, right? So Burnham, who wrote the Machiavellians, he wrote another book called Suicide of the West, which is my favorite book by him. And he discusses progressivism as like a natural evolution of liberalism, right? But I've always described progressivism as kind of like that place where fascism and Marxism meet. It's kind of like that connecting fiber that ties fascism and Marxism together and creates like a singular radical ideology out of both fascism and Marxism. But if you look at what a lot of the people on the left have done, they've taken aspects of fascism, they've taken aspects of Marxism, they've taken aspects of Leninism and Stalinism and Maoism, and they've constructed it into this what they call today progressivism, which actually is an older term utilized by American communists of the early 1900s, but has been completely distorted into this kind of like almost like this Chinese model of that we see today in China. This Chinese communism. So to continue, today's generation is desperately trying to make some sense out of their lives and out of the world. Most of them are products of the middle class. They have rejected their materialistic backgrounds, the goal of a well paid job, suburban home, automobile, country club membership, first class travel, status, security, and everything that meant success to their parents. What I find interesting about this is I was listening to somebody discuss the first time that when they were first exposed to Occupy Wall Street, they had said that, oh, I expected to get there and report on Occupy Wall Street and see a bunch of lower class people protesting against the establishment and against the haves. But what it turned out it was the people making between $300,000 and $600,000 a year protesting against the have mores. And it strikes me as so funny when people will ask, why don't the working class go out and protest? And I'm like, well, they have gone out and protest. They went out and protested during COVID, right? But working class people don't protest things that don't directly affect them. So if you shut down our jobs and you shut down our kids' schools and you're trying to trans our children, yeah, we'll protest about that. But if you bring up like a war 400,000 miles away, working class people don't see how that impacts their lives on a day-to-day basis. And they have it, it's not enough. They don't get upset enough about it to be mobilized into action.
Yeah, I thought that was funny too. And it just made me think about the history of communism and how in in the orthodox Marxism, the uh, the communist revolution or the socialist and then communist revolution is supposed to happen in the Western European countries. It wasn't supposed to happen in Russia, where most of the population are peasants and don't even fit into the model of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And then the people who are leading the revolution aren't even workers. They're these professional revolutionaries who just dropped out of the middle class.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And as you see, I had to take one of my AirPods out because it was deafening me. I was like having trouble hearing myself talk. I was like, golly, this is crazy. So I'm gonna roll with one AirPod in. So
All good.
okay. So they have had it. They watched it lead their parents to tranquilizers, alcohol, long-term endurance marriages or divorces, high blood pressure, ulcers, frustration, and the disillusionment of the good life. That makes me think of the reaction to like especially the millennial reaction to the 208 2008 financial crisis. And when you look at like what they did with oh, what was it? GameStop, the stocks, you would hear people come out and say, "Yeah, you destroyed my dad's life. You ruined the real estate market. Our house got repoed. I don't care if I lose every cent I have. I'm going to try to bankrupt you guys." And it was all just this constant reaction and like vengeance, model that these middle class kids had to what was being done around them in the world through the financial system. They have seen the almost unbelievable idiocy of our political leadership and the past political leaders, ranging from the mayors to governors to the White House, were regarded with respect and almost reverence. Today, they are viewed with contempt. This negativism now extends to all institutions, from the police and the courts to the system itself. We are living in a world of mass media which daily exposes society's innate hypocrisy, its contradictions, and the apparent failure of almost every facet of our social and political life. The young have seen their activist participatory democracy turn into its antithesis, nihilistic bombing and murder. The political panaceas of the past, such as the revolutions in Russia and China, have become the same old stuff under a different name. The search for freedom does not seem to have any road or destination. The young are inundated with a barrage of information and facts so overwhelming that the world has come to seem an utter bedlam, which has them spinning in a frenzy, looking for what man has always looked for from the beginning of time: a way of life that has some meaning or sense. A way of life means a certain degree of order where things have some relationship and can be pieced together into a system that at least provides some clues to what life is about. Men have always yearned for and sought direction by setting up religions, inventing political philosophies, creating scientific systems like Newton's, or formulating ideologies of various kinds. So he's almost coming out right here and saying, we're looking to replace religion and replace God with the systems of government that we impose upon people. And we're looking to construct the Tower of Babel again, basically, is what he's getting at.
It's interesting that you say that because I just, like in the past week, had the idea, I think based on reading some of your work, was knocking around my mind. But the idea of the state as the Tower of Babel.
Mm. Yeah, I think it was my last episode I recorded last week when I was talking about like this construction of the Tower of Babel. Like we look at it as this physical tower, and it's a really good symbolic usage of the word tower because towers are man-made. But in ancient uh, religions, they believed that the gods lived on tops of mountains. Like the Garden of Eden took place on top of a mountain. So the tower is the symbol of a man-made mountain. So it could just be like a political system that ranged from, across the world, across the spectrum, but what it was ultimately doing, it was trying to uplift man to the level of God. And when you look at like when he brought up earlier, like the orthodoxy of Marxism, right? You can even utilize that in in the uh, in the kind of the idea of religious terms, because you have the Orthodox Christians, and then you had systems that broke off from the Orthodox Christians, which is kind of what he's talking about. He's talking about these new systems that have the same ultimate goal, but are utilizing some of the foundation of the orthodoxy of Marxism, but it's moving into a different direction. And you can look at it from a religious perspective where you have Orthodox Christianity, you have the Coptics, you have Catholics, and then you have the Protestants. And so it's taking that exact same foundation, aiming at the same ends, but it's just doing it in different ways throughout different religious, denominations. This is what is behind the common cliche, getting it all together. Despite the realization that all values and factors are relative, fluid, and changing, and that it will be possible to get it all together only relatively. The elements will shift and move together just like the changing pattern in a turning kaleidoscope. In the past world, whether in its physical or intellectual terms, was much smaller, simpler, and more orderly. It inspired credibility. Today, everything is so complex as to be incomprehensible. What sense does it make for men to walk on the moon while other men are waiting on welfare lines? Or in Vietnam, killing and dying for a corrupt dictatorship in the name of freedom? These are the days when man has his hands on the sublime while he is up to his hips in the muck of madness. The establishment, in many ways, is as suicidal as some of the far left, except that they are infinitely more destructive than the far left can ever be. The outcome of the hopelessness and despair is morbidity. There is a feeling of death hanging over the nation. Today's generation faces all this and says, I don't want to spend my life in the way my family and their friends have. I want to do something, to create, to be me, to do my own thing, to be trans. Oh, it doesn't say trans. To live. The the older generation doesn't understand and worse doesn't want to. I don't want to be just a piece of data to be fed into a computer or a statistic in a public opinion poll, just a voter carrying a credit card. To the young, the world seems insane and falling apart. This is something that this paragraph here I've been really just focused on for the last couple of weeks. And when the Supreme Court came out and ruled against the tariffs, it had me thinking about this paragraph. And I was thinking like, okay, so if we take this complete free market like example of economics and we just aim at free market capitalism and jobs are shipped overseas with no um, obstructions, right? And then our kids grow up, and maybe some of our kids will be successful, but there will be less jobs available for all the kids. So maybe some of the kids will be successful and able to live a very comfortable life due to having cheap goods available to them. But there's going to be a subset, there's going to be a handful of kids that have no purpose, no meaning, no job, no way of making it in the world. And their entire focus is going to be overthrowing and destroying what the kids that have things have built for themselves. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying.
And so maybe there is something to a protectionist argument at preserving some semblance of purpose and production for the children of the future in order, even if your kids aren't working on the production lines, even if it's just to keep the people that do work the production lines, the lower class people, the working class people, you know, in a direction of purpose so that the entire nation doesn't turn into chaos.
Well said. And there's a part later in the prologue where he has some line like about how, you know, if there's the man with bread, he should be concerned about the man without bread
Yes.
because that man will kill him
Right.
for his
Right.
bread.
Yes.
And that idea, and I think I was actually listening to Daryl Cooper that first got me to sort of think about this, that in libertarianism there's a basic ideology or ideologies, there's basic values, the basic views. Um, but like, what are you going to do about certain problems in a society where there is a state and it is doing things, it is active? And so it seems like uh, Alinsky's he's getting at those issues from a different ideological framework, but they're definitely something that people dismiss like at their peril
Hmm.
and at the nation's peril. And I can totally understand how like people who maybe start out as anti-communists become in some sense socialists and are like, all right, well, we're going to have to have some programs for like the poor people. We're going to have some jobs trainings. We can't just let this massive angry underclass go
Mhm.
uh, unchecked or
Yeah, because it's
unhelped because
dangerous.
yeah, because it's really dangerous.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like I mean, it's like that whole apocryphal let them eat cake kind of thing. It's like, yeah, I don't know, man. Look at what happened in France. you, they'll only eat cake for so long. So, on the other side is the older generation, whose members are no less confused. If they are not as vocal or conscious, it may be because they can escape to a past when the world was simpler. They can still cling to the old values in the simple hope that everything will work out somehow, some way, that the younger generation will straighten out with the passing of time, unable to come to grips with the world as it is. They retreat in any confrontation with the younger generation with that infuriating cliche, when you get older, you'll understand. I find myself saying that more and more. One wonders at their reaction if some youngsters were to reply, when you get younger, which will never be, then you'll understand. So, of course, you'll never understand. Those of the older generation who claim a desire to understand say, when I talk to my kids or their friends, I'll say to them, look, I believe what you have to tell me is important and I respect it. You call me a square and you say that I'm not with it or I don't know where it's at or I don't know where the scene is and all of the rest of the words you use. Well, I'm going to agree with you. So suppose you tell me, what do you want? What do you mean when you say, I want to do my thing? What the hell is your thing? You say you want a better world. Like what? And don't tell me a world of peace and love and all the rest of that, because people are people. As you will find out when you get older, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say anything about when you get older. I really do respect what you have to say. Now, why don't you answer me? Do you know what you want? Do you know what you're talking about? Why can't we get together? And that is what we call the generation gap. What the present generation wants is what all generations have always wanted: a meaning, a sense of what the world and life are, a chance to strive for some sort of order. Like Nietzsche said, God is dead and we killed him. That's all
What
I
does
see.
6-7 mean?
Yeah, that's all I see when I read that section of this is Nietzsche. God is dead and we killed him. Like the the repercussions of secularizing and materializing the entire world and purpose and meaning is is the biggest like problem with the entire society. If the young were now writing our Declaration of Independence, they would begin when in the course of inhuman events, and their bill of particulars would range from Vietnam to our black, Chicano, and Puerto Rican ghettos, to the migrant workers, to Appalachia, to the hate, ignorance, disease, and starvation in the world. Such a bill of particulars would emphasize the absurdity of human affairs and the forlornness and emptiness, the fearful loneliness that comes from not knowing if there is any meaning to our lives. If I remember correctly, this was written when this was written, they still had the program taking place where Mexicans could come across the border and work in the United States and reside in Mexico. And much of the agriculture was taking place that in that way. And I think it was Hugo Chavez who protested that and said it was bad for the working class of the United States for that to be taking place. And it was actually the socialists and the communists who fought against having labor come across the border to work in the U.S.
It's funny.
Yeah.
The defenders of the working class.
Yeah, right. When they talk of values, they're asking for a reason. They are searching for an answer, at least for a time, to man's greatest question: why am I here? The young react to their chaotic world in different ways. Some panic and run, rationalizing that the system is going to collapse anyway of its own rot and corruption, and so they're copping out, going hippie or yippie, taking drugs, trying communes, anything to escape. Others went for pointless, sure loser confrontations so that they could fortify their rationalization and say, well, we tried and did our part, and then they copped out too. Others, sick with guilt and not knowing where to turn or what to do, went berserk. These were the weathermen and their like. They took the grand cop out, suicide. To these I have nothing to say or give but pity, and in some cases contempt, for such as those who leave their dead comrades and take off for Algeria or other points. What I have to say in this book is not the arrogance of unsolicited advice. It is the experience and counsel that so many young people have questioned me about through all night sessions on hundreds of campuses in America. It is for those young radicals who are committed to the fight, committed to life. Remember, we are talking about revolution, not revelation. You can miss the target by shooting too high as well as too low. First, there are no rules for revolution any more than there are rules for love or rules for happiness, but there are rules for radicals who want to change their world. This is so important to for people to remember because while libertarians are so concerned about consistency, and I was listening to Glenn Beck earlier, and he was talking about being having consistent thought too, and being a consistent thinker and not hypocritical. And there was I was just watching Fallout season two the other a few weeks ago, and there was a line in there, and I was like, that is exactly right. And the lady said, if the bad guys are the only ones using violence and hypocrisy, they will win. And I was like, that is exactly right because the entire aim when you look at what is the purpose of a revolution, it's power. That's it. Everything's about power. No, there's no amount of morals or hypocrisy or consistency that will stop them from aiming at power. Whatever they have to do to reach power, that's what they're going to do. And there are so many people in the ideological frame that will not give up the consistent ideological aspect to say, how do I stop the bad guys from getting power, which is what we want to do, right? If my neighbor were threatening to, if I knew my neighbor had the plan to come into my house and kill my children and steal my food, I wouldn't wait for him to do it, right? I would put an end to it before it happened. And so there there are actions that you need to take even if you are a peaceful person. There is are actions that you must take in order to stop the evil from rotting out the system from within.
I'm always reminded of Lenin and his new economic policy
Mm,
and just the way that it's like written about. I'm like paraphrasing
mm,
my kind of my own interpretation, but he's just sitting with the boys and he's like, "Come on, boys, we got to do this." And they're like, "What?" But we're communists. And he's like, "Yeah, but the whole system's going to fall apart if we don't do this. Like, we need to be ideologically flexible
right.
because we're committed to power, right? That's what we're trying to do. And if we lose power, we're all dead.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to do."
And
There
you
was a,
and you hear that more coming out of the right these days. I hear Bannon saying stuff like that all the time.
I think the right is definitely starting to wake up to certain things in America, or like there's even like becoming a real right in America. Um, one of the one of our writers at the Institute, Brad Pierce, posted a quote on X recently, and it was I think it was Edmund Burke, and it was something like along the lines of just because I have the abstract value of freedom, and I am I supposed to be happy when the madman breaks out of prison and
Hmm.
is now like roaming the countryside doing his
Right.
madman violence? Like, no, I'm
Right.
not happy about that.
Right. Right. And there comes a point when I can't even tell you when it was for me, but I mean, I'm 46 years old. All my kids are in their 20s. At some point, I stopped worrying about what my future held and I started worrying about my kids' future, right? And so there comes a point to where my ambitions are less important to me than the stability of the world for my children. And that's kind of how ideologies get flipped on their head. At some point, you're going to stop worrying about being consistent and being ideologically pure, and you're going to start worrying about the things that are really important to you.
Well said.
Okay, where was I? There are rules for radicals who want to change their world. There are certain central concepts of action in human politics that operate regardless of the scene or the time. To know these is basic to a pragmatic attack on the system. These rules make the difference between being a realistic radical and being a rhetorical one who uses the tired old words and slogans, calls the police pig or white fascist racist or motherfucker, that's my favorite, and has no stereotype so stereotyped himself that others react by saying, "Oh, he's one of those," and then promptly turn off. The one thing they haven't learned is to stop using racist and fascist, apparently. This failure of many of our younger activists to understand the art of communication has been disastrous. Even the most elementary grasp of the fundamental idea that one communicates within the experience of his audience and gives full respect to the other's values would have ruled our attacks on the American flag. The responsible organizer would have known that it is the establishment that has betrayed the flag while the flag itself remains the glorious symbol of America's hopes and aspirations, and he would have conveyed this message to his audience. On another level of communication, humor is essential, for through humor, much is accepted that would have been rejected if presented seriously. This is a sad and lonely generation. It laughs too little, and this, too, is tragic. For the real radical, doing his thing is to do the social thing for and with people. In a world where everything is so interrelated that one feels helpless to know where or how to grab hold and act, defeat sets in. For years, there have been people who found society too overwhelming and have withdrawn, concentrated on doing their own thing. Generally, we have put them into mental hospitals and diagnosed them as schizophrenics. Yeah, we need to get back to that. If the real radical finds that having long hair sets up psychological barriers to communication and organization, he cuts his hair. If I were organizing in an Orthodox Jewish community, I would not walk in there eating a ham sandwich unless I wanted to be rejected so I could have an excuse to cop out. My thing, if I want to organize, is solid communication with the people in the community. Lacking communication, I am in reality silent. Throughout history, silence has been regarded as assent. In this case, assent to the system. As an organizer, I start from where the world is, as it is, not as I would like it to be. That we accept the world as it does not in any sense weaken our desire to change it into what we believe it should be. It is necessary to begin where the world is if we are going to change it to what we think it should be. That means working in the system. There's another reason for working inside the system. Dostoevsky, hey man, you're taking our Orthodox writers now, said that taking a new step is what people fear most. Any revolutionary change must be preceded by a passive, affirmative, non challenging attitude toward change among the mass of our people. They must feel so frustrated, so defeated, so lost, so futureless in the prevailing system that they are willing to let go of the past and chance the future. This acceptance is the reformation essential to any revolution. To bring on this reformation requires that the organizer work inside the system among not only the middle class, but the 40% of American families, more than 70 million people whose income range from 5,000 to 10,000 a year. They cannot be dismissed by labeling them blue collar or hard hat. They will not continue to be relatively passive and slightly challenging. If we fail to communicate with them, if we don't encourage them to form alliances with us, they will move to the right. Maybe they will anyway, but let's not let it happen by default. I, one of the things, and maybe I'm just misremembering, but when he quotes Dostoevsky a while ago, he could have just as easily quoted de Tocqueville. When de Tocqueville wrote Democracy in America, he had said that the only way America will collapse is from within. That you have to get within the system to tear down the United States. And so it just shocks me that he doesn't reach back to de Tocqueville in that instance and instead reaches for Dostoevsky, which I would think that I don't know. I didn't go to college in the 90s or 2000s, let alone in the 60s and 70s. So maybe Dostoevsky was more prevalent teaching in the universities of the 60s and 70s than de Tocqueville was. So, but that's kind of one of those things that kind of stands out to me that he didn't reach back to de Tocqueville.
I thought it was interesting that he's got this idea of revolution versus revelation
Mm,
that he's going to play with a little bit later. And then that you need reformation before revolution.
hmm
And back to your idea about ideological consistency versus practical politics of power, he says that there's no rules for revolution,
Right,
but there's rules for the radicals who are trying to do it.
right.
I think that's he's getting at that idea. Like as
hmm
long as you are successful, that's all that matters. But here's how you can be successful.
Yeah. Our youth are impatient with the preliminaries that are essential to purposeful action. Effective organization is thwarted by the desire for instant and dramatic change, or as I have phrased it elsewhere, the demand for revelation rather than revolution. It's the kind of thing we see in play, writing. The first act introduces the characters and the plot. In the second act, the plot and characters are developed as the play strives to hold the audience's attention. In the final act, good and evil have their dramatic confrontation and resolution. The present generation wants to go right into the third act, skipping the first two, in which case there is no play, nothing but confrontation for confrontation's sake, a flare up and back to darkness. To build a powerful organization takes time. It is tedious, but that's the way the game is played. If you want to play and not just yell, kill the umpire. This I like that's so interesting too because like when I when I watch these protesters like on the streets, it's like they're acting out the protagonist role in their own head, in their own story, in their own movie. And so that's what that always makes me think of reading that part. It's like everybody's their own protagonist, their own hero in their own movie. And so they want to skip the first two acts because they already know the plot. They know the characters. They don't need to develop them. They just need to get into the LARPing and the action.
Yeah, people have been calling the protesters um the theater kids and
You
like
know,
make it
well, that's been around for a couple of years. I've been hearing um, a lot of guys refer to the Democratic Party and their politicians as the theater kids that that have been looking to for acknowledgement, you know. So that's been around for a little while. So putting it on the protesters, that's interesting.
and I think it's funny and it tracks. And like I love theater and I love theater kids. So like nothing against people putting on plays and whatnot. But I think totally right when you see all these protesters marching and they're really in it and they're chanting. Like, yeah, they're playing this role on this great stage. And it's like it's a weird thing about power and what we're experiencing because a lot of people are saying um just directly comparing ICE to the Gestapo, you
Mm,
know. And it's like, look, I want to be um charitable in my interpretations and whatnot, but I gotta say, it just seems strange to me to say that because it's like, oh yeah, this is just like the 1930s when the German public schools were holding anti-Gestapo walkouts and the
hmm
students were like attacking the Gestapo down at their Gestapo center. Like,
Right.
you know, and I saw, not to get too far afield, uh, I saw some interview with some like college professor who's like, yeah, we use the colleges to like train the students in our ideology so they can engage in like the counter hegemonic activity. I'm like, dude, you're not the counter hegemonic activity. You're the hegemonic activity.
Hmm.
And it's so weird. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be so great if you had like, if you had a secret police organization that truly believed it was the revolutionary group, that it was at any moment going to be crushed by the state, but it was in fact the violent repression of the state.
Hmm.
And then like they almost kind of did that with the NKVD in the Soviet Union. But that these protesters make me kind of think about that. Like imagine if like an alien came down from Mars or wherever and you took them to a protest and you were explaining what's going on and you'd be like, yeah, so that right there is like that's the Gestapo, the most feared secret police agency in the history of the world. Who's that? People yelling at them. Well, those are the protesters. Those are the civilian protesters screaming at them and blowing whistles at them and not being mass executed, strangely enough.
That's true. I made a joke after January 6th that I was like, I said, it looks like the Stasi are out for the Jews. If you need a place to hide, I have an attic available, right? And I had progressives coming at me like hitting like at FBI. This guy is helping the protesters, and I was like, dude, I'm driving a truck. I'm making a joke.
This man
So,
is providing aid and comfort to enemies of the people.
right, exactly. It was one of the craziest things. I was just like, okay, like you people are weird. All right. So, what is the alternative to working inside the system? A mess of rhetorical garbage about burn the system down. Yippee yells of do it or do your thing. What else? Bombs, sniping, silence when police are killed, and screams of murdering fascist pigs when others are killed. Attacking and baiting the police, public suicide, power comes out of the barrel of a gun is an absurd rallying cry when the other side has all the guns. Lenin was a pragmatist. When he returned to what was then Petrograd from exile, he said that the Bolsheviks stood for getting power through the ballot, but would reconsider after they got the guns. Militant mouthings, spouting quotes from Mao, Castro, and Che Guevara, which are as germane to our highly technological, computerized, cybernetic, nuclear powered mass media society as a stagecoach on a jet runway at Kennedy Airport. Let us, in the name of radical pragmatism, not forget that in our system, with all its repressions, we can still speak out and denounce the administration, attack its policies, work to build an opposition political base. True, there is government harassment, but there still is that relative freedom to fight. I can attack my government, try to organize to change it. That's more than I can do in Moscow, Peking, or Havana. Remember, the reaction of the Red Guard to the Cultural Revolution and the fate of the Chinese college students, just as a few of the violent episodes of bombings or a courtroom shootout that we have experienced here would have resulted in a sweeping purge and mass executions in Russia, China, or Cuba. Let's keep some perspective. Well, and what's funny is when he quotes Lenin up here, he's basically saying, yeah, he was a pragmatist. And we need to like learn that we stand for getting power, and right now we're going to use the ballot until we get in control of the guns. And then he goes down here and he says, "This is what happens when the other people have control of the guns. So let's not like turn to violence until we have that control of the guns because we don't want mass executions for us. We want mass executions for them." And then you see today, as you were just saying, they're not they'll get as violent as they want with the police or ICE or FBI or whoever, and there's not mass executions. We will start with the system because there is no other place to start from except political lunacy. It is most important for those of us who want revolutionary change to understand that revolution must be preceded by a reformation. To assume that a political revolution can survive without the supporting base of a popular reformation is to ask for the impossible in politics. Men don't like to step abruptly out of the security of familiar experience. They need a bridge to cross from their own experience to a new way. A revolutionary organizer must shake up the prevailing patterns of their lives, agitate, create disenchantment and discontent with the current values to produce, if not a passion for change, at least a passive, affirmative, non challenging climate. They've done a great job utilizing social media for that cause. The revolution was affected before the war commenced, John Adams wrote. The revolution was in the hearts and minds of the people. This radical change in the principles, opinions, sentiments, and affections of the people was the real American Revolution. A revolution without a prior reformation would collapse or become a totalitarian tyranny. A reformation means that masses of our people have reached the point of disillusionment with past ways and values. They don't know what will work, but they do know that the prevailing system is self defeating, frustrating, and hopeless. They won't act for change, but won't strongly oppose those who do. The time is then ripe for revolution. This is what this makes me think of it like the way that Congress refuses to act on anything. They refuse to act on anything. They refuse to get anything done. They refuse to do anything other than run for reelection, creating this self-defeating, frustrating, and hopelessness within the populace. And the populace then goes out into the street and demands reformation or revolution. Those who, for whatever combination of reasons, encourage the opposite of reformation become the unwitting allies of the far political right. Parts of the far left have gone so far in the political circle that they are now all but indistinguishable from the extreme right. It reminds me of the days when Hitler, new on the scene, was excused for his actions by humanitarians on the grounds of a paternal rejection and childhood trauma. When there are people who espouse the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy or the Tate murders or the Marion County courthouse kidnapping and killings or the University of Wisconsin bombing and killings as revolutionary acts, then we are dealing with people who are merely hiding psychosis behind a political mask. The masses of people recoil with horror and say our way is bad and we are willing to let it change, but certainly not for this murderous madness. No matter how bad things are now, they are better than that. So they begin to turn back. They regress into acceptance of a coming massive repression in the name of law and order.
Yeah, I looked up that Wisconsin University bombing.
Mhm.
That was crazy. Like some dudes set off a car bomb and they were trying to blow up the it was like some army research facility that was partnering with the college. But they didn't even really damage um that building, but they damaged a bunch of other buildings and they killed some guy, even though they set it off at like 3 in the morning. But I guess some poor guy was working late. But it's like I knew things were crazy back then. And I knew people were like setting off bombs, but
Mhm.
it's like, could you imagine like just someone setting off a car bomb at like Harvard or Princeton like now? Like that would be nuts.
Yeah.
Those are crazy times.
Right. Yeah. No, I know my dad, like we were talking, I guess it was probably around 2018, 2019. And he goes, man, I don't like the trajectory that the country's on because it's pointing to a time of violence like we saw in the 60s. And it's funny that he said that it's people utilizing the revolution as as a cover for their psychosis. And if you notice, like anytime that there's political violence, like whether it was the killing of Charlie Kirk or the anti-Semite that went to Governor Shapiro's house, or the killing of the state Congress people in Minnesota, the left is always like, oh no, they're right wingers and they're crazy right wingers, and the right wing people are always pointing at the left, going, "No, they're crazy left wingers," and the media comes out and say, "Oh, it's some nihilistic like half left, half right. You know, you have all this mixed ideology in there, and it's just cover for psychosis." And it makes you wonder how much of that is actually planted into the narrative and how much of it is actually really a part of the of that person's narrative going into those killings. It's really wild when you see that he was laying out like, look, these the people that are using violence in this way, they're suffering from psychosis. They're not on our side. You know, they're left wingers that have turned to right wing tactics, is what basically what he says. And it's like, all right, dude, like whatever. Like we could just admit that people on the left can be violent and people on the right can be violent, and let's just take the truth for what it is.
Yeah, and back to a couple of your points. One, that it's all about power, and two, that he wants to utilize the system until they get the guns.
Mm-hmm.
So that the mass executions, politics is about who does the mass executions to whom.
Right.
Um, so it's like, well, what is power? And like the working definition that I've come up with is that it's coalitional, proactive aggression, including lethal aggression. But it's coalitional. That's important. So when you have just some nut job off on his own, assassinating a CEO or assassinating a thought leader
Right.
or whatever the case may be, they're not part of a coalition. Now, the coalition that it seems like Alinsky wants to build is probably going to starve us all to death and mass execute millions of people, but it's going to do it as a coalition.
Right.
And so there's this idea that like, the man that works within the coalition has a discipline. That's a good guy. It's a guy you can work with. A guy that's off on his own killing people, that's a psychopath.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of funny because it's almost like back to your Tower of Babel idea. It's almost like, well, like you can build a state like this massive tower that is kind of like a psychopathic demon in terms of what it's going to do, but it can be made up of all these people who are seeing themselves not as crazy, and they won't go off and do crazy stuff on their own, but they're in this coalition working for these values that end up creating all these horrors.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and well, was it Stalin that said one murder is a tragedy and a million is a statistic? So it's kind of like that too. He's kind of like, yeah, these individual like acts are like terrible and these people are suffering from psychosis, but when we get the guns and we kill a million people, it's just going to be par for the course.
That's great. I like that's a nice juxtaposition. Yeah, one man's one man's death is a tragedy, millions is a statistic. One
Mhm.
guy going around killing people, that's horrific psychopathic behavior. But a group going around killing millions, that's just business.
Yeah. Yeah. In the midst of the gassing and violence by the Chicago Police and National Guard during the 1968 Democratic Convention, many students asked me, "Do you still believe we should try to work inside our system?" These were students who had been with Eugene McCarthy in New Hampshire and followed him across the country. Some had been with Robert Kennedy when he was killed in Los Angeles. Many of the tears that were shed in Chicago were not from gas. Mr. Alinsky, we fought in primary after primary, and the people voted no on Vietnam. Look at that convention. They're not paying any attention to the vote. Look at your police and the army. You still want us to work in the system? It hurt me to see the American army with drawn bayonets advancing on American boys and girls. But the answer I gave the young radicals seemed to me the only realistic one. Do one of three things. One, go find a wailing wall and feel sorry for yourselves. Two, go psycho and start bombing. But this will only swing people to the right. Three, learn a lesson. Go home, organize, build power. Excuse me. And at the next convention, you be the delegates. Remember, once you organize people around something as commonly agreed upon as pollution, then an organized people is on the move. From there, it's a short and natural step to political pollution, to Pentagon pollution. It is not enough to just elect your candidates. You must keep the pressure on. Radicals should keep in mind Franklin D. Roosevelt's response to a reform delegation. Okay, you've convinced me. Now go on out and bring pressure on me. Action comes from keeping the heat on. No politician can sit on a hot issue if you make it hot enough. As for Vietnam, I would like to see our nation be the first in the history of man to publicly say, we were wrong. What we did was horrible. We got in and kept getting in deeper and deeper. And at every step, we invented new reasons for staying. We have paid part of the price in 44,000 dead Americans. There is nothing we can ever do to make it up to the people of Indochina or to our own people, but we will try. We believe that our world has come of age, so that it is no longer a sign of weakness or defeat to abandon a childish pride and vanity, to admit we were wrong. Such an admission would shake up the foreign policy concepts of all nations and open the door to a new international order. This is our alternative to Vietnam. Anything else is the old makeshift patchwork. If this were to happen, Vietnam may even have been somewhat worth it. A final word on our system. The democratic ideal springs from the ideas of liberty, equality, majority rule through free elections, protection of the rights of minorities, and freedom to subscribe to multiple loyalties in matters of religion, economics, and politics rather than to a total loyalty of the state. The spirit of democracy is the idea of importance and worth in the individual, and faith in the kind of world where the individual can achieve as much of its potential as possible. Great dangers always accompany great opportunities. The possibility of destruction is always implicit in the act of creation. Thus, the greatest enemy of individual freedom is the individual himself. That's a paradox, ain't it?
There's a lot of, I feel like, paradoxical stuff he's getting into. Just to go back, that line about many of the tears cried in Chicago were not from gas. That was hilarious. That's one of my
Oh,
favorite lines. That's
yes.
just so funny. And
Yeah.
then also he brings up FDR and like I like that line where he's like, "You've convinced me. Now put pressure on me." And it made me think of that line from um maybe it's Jackson where he's like, "They've like the court has made its decision. Now let
Oh,
it
you let it enforce it. Yeah.
let it enforce it."
Yeah.
And I've actually I've been having fun with liberal friends. You might enjoy this. So I'll say to them, I'll be like, "How do you guys feel about ICE?" And I get them like to go off on ICE. You'd be like, "It's the Gestapo," And I'm like, "How do you feel about them setting up these detention centers?" Like, "Oh my God, that's like those are concentration camps. These are the Nazis." And I'm like, "How do you feel about Franklin Delano Roosevelt?" Check. And they're like, either they're like, they don't know what to say, or they're like, or they don't know what I'm getting at. So they're like, he was a good president. He did, the New Deal. And I'm like, checkmate, motherfucker. And I've been meaning to
Japanese
do this.
concentration camps.
I haven't seen I haven't seen any posts on X about people complaining about the detention centers recently. But the next time I see one, I'm gonna repost it. I'm gonna say Franklin Delano Roosevelt will be loving this.
I like the yeah, what was it they were calling the one down there in Florida? Uh Alligator Alcatraz. And I heard somebody call it what did they call it? Oh, I can't remember what they were calling it now. It was Gator something. It was hilarious though. I was dying. I can't think of what they were calling it now off the top of my head. For some reason, I'm drawing a blank. What struck me in this part was when he's talking here, the democratic ideal springs from the ideas of liberty, equality, majority rule, right? So,
And respect
so
for minority rights.
yeah, right. Well, there was a quote from one of the founders. I can't remember which one off the top of my head, but he said, "We must protect the minority of the opulent from the majority of the tyranny of the majority," or something like that. So that just kind of struck me. I was like, "Wait, you're talking about the democratic ideal of our system springs from majority rule, but the founders were talking about protecting the rich minority from the tyranny of the majority." Like, let's just kind of figure this out here, fella. All right. From the beginning, the weakness as well as the strength of the democratic ideal has been the people. People cannot be free unless they are willing to sacrifice some of their interests to guarantee the freedom of others. The price of democracy is the ongoing pursuit of the common good by all of the people. 135 years ago to Tocqueville, oh, it's de Tocqueville. So he does bring up de Tocqueville, gravely warned that unless individual citizens were regularly involved in the action of governing themselves, self government would pass from the scene. Citizen participation is the animating spirit and force in a society predicated on voluntarism. Oh, now he's going Rothbard on us. We are
Oh,
not
it's
here.
citizenship is important.
Was that
Citizenship is important, apparently.
citizen participation? Is the
Imagine that.
animating spirit and force in a society predicated on voluntarism. We are not here concerned with people who profess the democratic faith, but yearn for the dark security of dependency where they can be spared the burden of decisions. Reluctant to grow up or incapable of doing so, they want to remain children and be cared for by others. Those who can should be encouraged to grow for the others. The fault lies not in the system, but in themselves. Here we are desperately concerned with the vast mass of our people who, thwarted through lack of interest or opportunity or both, do not participate in the endless responsibilities of citizenship and are resigned to lives determined by others. He's just going straight Darwinian. To lose your identity as a citizen of democracy is but a step from losing your identity as a person. People react to this frustration by not acting at all. The separation of the people from the routine daily functions of citizenship is heartbreak in a democracy. It is a grave situation when a people resign their citizenship or when a resident of a great city, though he may desire to take a hand, lacks the means to participate. That citizen sinks further into apathy, anonymity, and depersonalization. The result is that he comes to depend on public authority and a state of civic sclerosis sets in. Okay, he screwed up here because he says that citizen sinks further into apathy, anonymity, and depersonalization. It would have flowed a lot better had he said apathy, anonymity, and despondency. Come on, man. Who taught you to write, brother? From time to time, there have been external enemies at our gates. There has always been the enemy within, the hidden and malignant inertia that foreshadows more certain destruction to our life and future than any nuclear warhead. There can be no darker or more devastating tragedy than the death of man's faith in himself and in his power to direct his future. I salute the present generation. Hang on to one of your most precious parts of youth, laughter. Don't lose it, as many of you seem to have done. You need it. Together we may find some of what we're looking for: laughter, beauty, love, and the chance to create. Saul Alinsky. All right, so that is the prologue. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I got the new way that I read books, and I got this from our colleague at the Institute, Bill Bupert, is I always read the last part first. So I'd gone and I had read the last part, and he talks a lot about, he reiterates the idea of you got to reach out to the middle class. And he goes into this like sociological analysis of the middle class as tripartite, the lower, middle, and upper middle class. And it reminded me a lot of this work by the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called Distinction,
Mm-hmm.
which is all about the class system in France in the mid 20th century. Except that whereas Bourdieu relies a lot on um, questionnaires, empirical research, Alinsky's just sort of like, it's almost like a mythology. He's saying things about uh, the lower middle class that like track with like data points that like I see and maybe even existed back then, but also it seems like it's like he's really like oversimplifying. So it made me think like, oh, like, as Marxists tend to do. So then when I went and read the prologue, it's like, okay, yeah, he's moved, he claims to be moving beyond the Marxist orthodoxy, but and so it's more complicated and it's a little more accurate or it's a better model, but it's still a bad model.
Hmm.
And like, but I was really impressed with the writing overall, and with the idea that look, guys, we can't just be out there calling people racist and motherfucker and like blowing stuff up. Like, we need to be disciplined. We need to treat people with respect. You know, which is not a good idea to burn the flag. That's an important symbol. We should take that symbol for ourselves. And I was like, okay, this is an intelligent guy. This is a smart guy
Hmm.
who's up to something that I should definitely pay attention to.
Well, it's a deconstructionist perspective, right? He wants to deconstruct the mythos that surrounds the American uh, citizen and reconstruct a new mythos. You see this with like the 1619 project and stuff like this, right? Where they're rewriting history to fit their narratives. And what I think a lot of it is the left-wing revolutionary thought versus like the I want to say right-wing thought, but maybe it's not even right-wing thought. I would have to think deeper on this thought, but I feel like people like me, like the blue collar kind of like leans right, kind of like thinks of themselves as right wing, enjoys the tradition of the nation, kind of wraps yourself in the flag, wants to preserve, the successes for my children is more of a frontier mindset, whereas the revolutionary ideal is more of the political aspect. So over the decades, you've really had this kind of like battle between the political and the frontiersmen, and the political has always moved further left, while the frontiersman has kind of controlled the culture and pulled the culture further right. And as the political gets more engaged in the culture, it's woken the frontiersmen up to be more political. And that's kind of where I'm like reading what he's saying. He's saying we have to make sure that these kind of like frontier minded people, these pull yourself up by the bootstraps people, come to our side politically before we start dismantling their culture. Because if you start dismantling the culture before you have them hooked politically into believing in your system, then they're going to move right on you, right? And those that refuse to engage politically deserve what they get in the long run. But those that join our side will be wielding the guns at those that have fought against what we're trying to do.
One thing I thought was interesting in the last section of the book when he's doing his analysis of the class is that the people he puts in the lower middle class are like mostly government employees. So is the cops, the firefighters, the public school teachers. And that was interesting to me. I never really think about uh I would never think of like cops and firefighters as lower middle class.
Right.
And also from like a libertarian perspective, well, those are government employees. Like, so yeah, it makes sense that like you should get, if you can't get the government employees on your side, then your politics suck.
Hmm.
But then when you go back to the prologue, he's not getting into those like real specifics. He does mention like, oh, we really need to focus on the people making like $5,000 to $10,000 a year. So I went
Hmm.
into the inflation calculator. So today that would be people making like 43,000 to like $86,000 a year.
Right.
And so there's definitely like he he wants to focus on all these different things that people are concerned about, but his system's focusing on power. And it's going to be like, well, what is it that like people really want? and what is it that they don't like really have? And like where I'm thinking, okay, this guy is basically like ultimately a communist is like, well, we're gonna give the power to the people. Like, doesn't make any sense. And I totally understand why, like throughout history, great minds have just hated democracy. Because we're raised, I went to government public schools for elementary school at least, and it's like democracy, it is basically like a deity. Like
Mhm.
democracy and we're all equal. And the people have sovereignty. But
Yep.
it's like, yeah, another word for the people is the mob
Hmm.
that you're afraid of. And later on, he's going to talk about like, it's funny when he talks about the haves versus the have nots. The have nots are wondering when they can eat, and the haves are wondering when they can sleep because they're always
Hmm.
under the threat of the have nots. Back to your point about the founding fathers trying to protect their privileged minority from the masses.
Yeah.
And I can totally empathize. I'm not a rich guy, but I can totally empathize with a guy being successful, not wanting to get murdered in his sleep. That seems
Hmm.
reasonable to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly does. And they did a great job of creating a system. It's I think the US was like the first political system that had a real thriving middle class in it. Like before it was the servant class and it was the upper class, and that was it. That's what you had. And creating that that solid cushion of a middle class, it got rid of the aspect and the idea that there would be a revolutionary guard that comes up and tries to overthrow the government, that the people wouldn't rebel as strongly against the government because they were living, luxurious, comfortable lives. And and since the 2008 financial crisis, that gap has been growing further and further apart. And it's been because of the rate of inflation and the inflation of the money supply, it has made it a lot more difficult to live in the middle class than it used to be, right? Like Henry Ford, famously paid his factory workers $5 a day because he was like, I want the people that work for me to be able to afford the product that we're building. Some of that, yeah, was greed. He wanted to be able to sell more cars, but at the same time, he increased the lifestyle of his factory workers and set a precedent for that lifestyle that wasn't met anywhere else by any other factory owner. And so there's this kind of like understanding that the ultra wealthy have had over the years that if you want to keep your employees satisfied, entering into the workday as if they own the place and treating it with respect and dignity and working hard, then you pay them, a wage that reflects that. And if you underpay and you create like a class, so to speak, that they're not going to care, that they're not going to treat their work as property of their own, that they own it. They're going to treat it as something they just have to do to survive. And you're going to create a lot of bitterness and turmoil within society if that's the route you follow. So increasing the wages of the middle class was actually one of the most intelligent things that the business class of America realized early on within the founding of the nation. And by depending on the government to set minimum wage standards and to create this welfare state in order to care for the citizens of the nation, it took a lot of that responsibility off the business owners, which then turned around and created another two-class system, which they never wanted in the first place.
Yeah, I don't know who is alleged to have said this, but there's this saying that you can always hire one half of the poor to kill the other half.
Hmm.
But so I think that's wrong because like you're going to staff your death squad with the poor people. I think it's you can always hire like 2% of the middle class to kill the poor and whoever else gets in the way. And I'm not an expert on like death squad recruitment, but I think just like with who Alinsky is recruiting from, he's recruiting from these middle class kids.
I'm gonna have Scott change your title to the Death Squad fellow.
Don't do it. I'm just saying, I'm just doing sociology over here. I'm not
Right,
advocating anything.
right,
But
right.
I thought it's funny that we're like the part in the book where he's like, we haven't gotten to this yet, but where he's like, the man with bread needs to be concerned about the man without bread because that man's
Hmm.
going to kill him. And it's like, and it's kind of written like a threat. Like, you better be willing to like fund our social welfare program or we're going to kill you. But it's
Right.
like, we could flip that around. Like, well, maybe they kill you. You know, maybe instead of spending all these taxes on all these programs, they just spend the taxes on right wing death squads and they give them some vans and they give them some lists and they drive around at night and they round people up and they shoot them. How about that? And it's like, so you can see how people can become radicalized in both like directions.
Hmm.
And from like a sort of a libertarian, sort of purist ideological perspective, one might say, well, the people in society that have the power are the people with the power, the political class. And as soon as like you take the power, now you become the political class. Then it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, who are those individuals and what do they think? And who do they hate? Like, if everyone in the government, like, everyone at the FBI, like, really, 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 really hates Christians and would like to kill all the Christians, that's different than if like everyone at the FBI is like, hey, like religious freedom, that's cool. But still a secret police. It's still
Yeah.
dangerous. Still federal cops, but there are differences.
Right. Well, and we can kind of see this like something like that, like occurring under the Biden administration, especially, and then moving into the Trump administration with the whole Don Lemon incident, right? So the what was the name of that act? God, I can't think of the name of the act that they got Don Lemon
The
under.
FACE Act.
Yeah, FACE Act. Thank you. I kept wanting to say Save Act, and I'm like, no, that's that thing they're trying to pass right now.
The
That's
Save
like,
Face Act.
yeah, the Save Face Act. There you go. Yeah, the Face Act. So it was written into the law that it applied not only to medical facilities, specifically abortion centers, but it also applied to places of worship. But it had never been used for places of worship. It had always been used very stringently on for to protect abortions and abortion centers because that had become like a sacrament to the state, right? And so when but now that they're starting to use it against people that are obstructing, religious ceremonies, and then like the left is like, well, no, this is not the way it's supposed to be used. It's supposed to be used to protect child sacrifice, not communion, you know.
When I saw the video from that church of like the terrified children, I
Oh
moved
my
like
God.
2 or 3 clicks to the right, just
Mm,
right there.
yep.
The action was in my reaction.
Yeah.
You know what else is funny too is when people like I've heard this my whole life, like, man, we got to watch out for these right wing reactionaries. I never really thought about it. I was like, oh no, there's right wing reactionaries out there. But then I thought about it and I was like, wait a minute, like a reactionary. So they're reacting. What are they reacting to? And they never
Mm,
say that. And they're
hmm.
like, oh, this is what they're reacting to. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
That they're
Yeah.
reacting to this in like a negative way. It's like, don't get upset. Don't react to what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, and that's where the whole idea of the uniparty came from, is because the right stopped reacting. They just kind of were like, wait, you can do it, you just can't do it that fast. It's like,
Marxism with a speed limit.
yeah, you can trans my kids, you just have to take your time doing it. No, you can't.
You need
Get
to
your
send a
fuck
letter home to me.
get your fucking hands off my kids. How about that? you know? But all right, man. It's been a little bit over an hour, and I still need to eat dinner. So, any last thoughts?
Just thank you so much for inviting me to do this. This has been really fun and really edifying, as the kids would say.
Yeah, this has been 6-7 or 7-6 or 5-4-3-2-1. Um, Yeah, no, dude, I really enjoyed it. I appreciate it, and we'll pick up on the purpose next week, and we'll shoot for Sunday next week.
Let's do it.
Yeah, and we'll pick up on the purpose next week, and I'm sure both of us will have plenty to say about this chapter.
No doubt.
All right, brother. Well, I'm going to stop the recording right here.
Thank you, Tommy.
Yes, sir.